The unsolved murder of Elizabeth Liz Barraza. Imagine standing in your own driveway early on a Friday morning. The sun has barely begun to rise. You're putting out tables and boxes for a garage sale. You're thinking about the weekend ahead, an upcoming vacation, maybe the people who will stop by looking for a bargain. Then a pickup truck drives into your neighborhood. It passes your house. It turns around. It stops nearby. Someone gets out, walks directly toward you, exchanges a few words with you, and pulls out a gun. Within seconds, you're lying mortally wounded in your own driveway. The killer runs back to the truck and disappears. But there's something unusual about this murder. The killer was caught on camera. The vehicle was caught on camera. Parts of the killer's movements were caught on camera, and investigators believe physical evidence was left behind. Yet more than 7 years later, no one has been arrested. Who wanted 29-year-old Elizabeth Barraza dead? And probably the biggest question of all, why? I'm Alan Key, and this is Cold Cases with Alan Key. Today we're looking at one of the most baffling unsolved murders in Texas, the January 2019 killing of Elizabeth Liz Barraza. Elizabeth Barraza was 29 years old and lived with her husband Sergio in a neighborhood near Tomball, Texas, northwest of Houston. By virtually every public account, Liz was someone who enjoyed helping other people. She was also a major fan of Star Wars, Harry Potter, and the world of science fiction and fantasy. Liz belonged to the local chapter of the 501st Legion, an international organization whose members create elaborate Star Wars costumes and often appear at charitable events. Liz didn't simply collect memorabilia or watch the movies. She dressed in costume and participated in events that brought some happiness to children and families. After her death, family and friends remembered her with lightsabers and references to the fictional universe she loved. Liz was also an organ donor, and her father said her donation ultimately helped 4 people. In January 2019, Liz and Sergio were approaching their 5th wedding anniversary. They had planned a trip to Orlando, Florida, including a visit to Universal Studios and the wizarding world of Harry Potter. Liz had taken Friday, January 25th off from work. Before the trip, she decided to hold a garage sale and make some additional spending money for their vacation. It should have been an ordinary Friday. Instead, within minutes after her husband left for work, Liz's life would be taken. Friday morning / January 25th, 2019. Liz was up early. Before getting the garage sale ready, she made a trip to a local Starbucks. She then returned home and began moving items into the driveway. A surveillance camera recorded her preparing for the sale. Sergio was also home that morning. Shortly before 7 o'clock, reported at approximately 6:48 a.m., he left for work. Liz remained outside. And then a vehicle appeared. Investigators would later focus intensely on that vehicle. It was a dark-colored, 4-door Nissan Frontier pickup, described by investigators as a Pro 4 wheel-drive type vehicle. Surveillance footage showed the truck in the neighborhood. According to later released video, the truck passed through the area, turned around, and eventually stopped near the Barraza residence. Think about the timing. Sergio leaves for work. Only minutes later, the truck arrives. That timing is one of the reasons investigators have come to believe this was not simply a random crime. Someone exits the pickup. The surveillance video isn't clear enough to definitively identify the person's sex. At different times, observers have described the attacker as possibly female, while investigators have said the killer could be either a man or a woman. The individual appears relatively small in stature and is wearing unusual clothing: a long coat, robe, gown, or similar garment, boots, and possibly a wig. That clothing has fueled years of speculation. Was it simply what the killer normally wore, or was it a deliberate disguise? Investigators today believe the shooter was disguised. The person begins walking toward Liz. Liz apparently has no immediate reason to run. After all, she's setting up a garage sale. Someone walking toward your driveway early that morning might simply be an eager customer. The two exchange a few words. Then the visitor produces a handgun. The shooter fires. Liz is struck multiple times. She falls. And then, in perhaps the most disturbing moment captured on the surveillance video, the attacker fires again while Liz is down. 4 shots in all. Then the killer turns, runs back to the Nissan Frontier, and drives away. Some have speculated that robbery was the motive, yet nothing was taken. The killer didn't search Liz's pockets. The killer didn't enter the house and begin stealing valuables. There was no apparent attempt to take the garage sale money. Instead, the person arrived, walked directly toward Liz, shot her, and left. Investigators believe the weapon was a revolver. That's important because a typical semi-automatic handgun ejects cartridge casings as it's fired. A revolver generally does not. Investigators reported finding no discarded shell casings at the scene. Harris County investigators have said those circumstances, combined with the disguise and timing, point toward a planned killing. A neighbor heard the gunfire and called 911. Emergency personnel responded. Liz was critically injured and transported to the hospital. She survived through that day. But on January 26, 2019, Elizabeth Barraza died from her wounds. She was only 29 years old. The anniversary trip she and Sergio were preparing to take would now be replaced by a funeral. Investigators had something that homicide detectives in countless other cases would love to have. Video. Not perfect video, but video. Sadly, the video was not clear enough to read a license plate or see the killer's face. But it was video nonetheless. The suspected getaway vehicle appeared on several surveillance cameras. Detectives identified it as a dark-colored Nissan Frontier, with investigators initially saying they were nearly certain it was a black 4-door Frontier. Later descriptions have focused on a newer model Pro 4 wheel drive version. The vehicle's movements are especially interesting. Video showed the truck traveling through the neighborhood before the shooting. It appears to turn around and position itself before the attacker approaches Liz. After the shooting, the truck leaves. But it reportedly circles back and passes the area again. Why? Was the driver checking to see whether Liz was dead? Was the killer trying to determine whether police had arrived? Did the driver suddenly realize there was another way out of the neighborhood? We simply don't know. But the truck may be one of the best clues in the entire investigation. Someone owned that Nissan Frontier. Someone drove it. Someone may have borrowed it. Someone may remember a friend, coworker, relative, or neighbor who owned a similar truck in January of 2019. And somewhere, there may still be a photograph, repair record, sales record, or other piece of information capable of identifying it. The question that has haunted this investigation is why Liz? Why would anyone want Elizabeth Barraza dead? Investigators search for the obvious motives: money, relationships, jealousy, personal conflicts, workplace problems, people involved in organizations with which Liz associated. And, naturally, investigators looked closely at her husband. When a married person is murdered, investigators routinely examine the spouse. Sergio was questioned and investigated. But this is where it's important to separate facts from internet speculation. In January 2025, Harris County Sheriff's Office Sergeant Michael Ritchie publicly addressed Sergio's status. He said investigators had examined him and that Sergio had been cooperative. Most importantly, Ritchie said investigators had found nothing indicating Sergio was involved in Liz's murder. Investigators also examined possible financial motives. There was reportedly life insurance on Liz, but authorities said in 2025 that the policy remained unpaid and that Sergio had not requested payment. Detectives have therefore continued asking a broader question. Who else might have benefited from Liz's death? Liz's father, Robert Bob Newell, has publicly stated that he believes his daughter may have been the victim of a murder for hire. That is his belief. It has not been established by police as the solution to the case. But it's easy to understand why the theory exists. The killer appears to have arrived with a specific purpose. The shooter appears disguised. A revolver may have been deliberately chosen, potentially reducing evidence left at the scene. Nothing was stolen. The attack happened shortly after Sergio left, and the killer apparently knew exactly where to find Liz. Bob Newell has suggested there could therefore be two people investigators have yet to identify: the person who actually fired the shots and whoever may have arranged the killing. If that theory were correct, it could also explain one of the most frustrating aspects of the case: the absence of an obvious connection between Liz and the shooter. Police can investigate everyone in a victim's life, but if the person pulling the trigger is a stranger hired by someone else, finding the connection becomes much more difficult. Still, there is currently no public proof establishing that murder for hire is what happened. The case has never simply been abandoned. Over the years, Harris County investigators have followed tips, examined people of interest, and used newer investigative technology. Authorities have used geofence technology as part of the investigation and have pursued subpoenas involving other information that has not yet been publicly disclosed. In December 2023, the investigation expanded further with assistance from the FBI, Texas Rangers, and Texas Anti-Gang Unit. And there is another intriguing development. In January 2026, Sergeant Ritchie said investigators still have evidence recovered from the scene. He also expressed hope that improvements in technology could eventually allow investigators to do something with that evidence that wasn't previously possible. That statement deserves attention, because this is how cold cases are increasingly solved. A tiny piece of evidence collected years ago may seem useless at the time, but science changes. DNA testing becomes more sensitive. Databases grow. Digital records improve. Vehicles can sometimes be tracked through records that weren't easily searchable years earlier. A person's online history may reveal connections detectives never previously knew existed. And sometimes, the breakthrough comes not from one dramatic piece of evidence, but from combining old evidence with a new tip. As of 2026, the Harris County Sheriff's Office describes the investigation as very active. There has been no arrest, no publicly identified killer, and no publicly confirmed motive. Liz's parents, Bob and Rosemary Newell, have spent years keeping their daughter's case in the public eye. In 2026, their search for answers took on even greater urgency. Bob publicly revealed that he had been diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal cancer that had spread to other areas of his body. His hope is to live long enough to learn who murdered his daughter. For 7 years, Liz's family has lived with the knowledge that someone, somewhere, almost certainly knows more than they have admitted. Maybe they recognize the truck. Maybe the killer told someone what happened. Maybe someone noticed unusual behavior immediately after January 25th, 2019. Maybe someone knows about a gun that disappeared. Maybe someone knows who had a reason to want Liz dead. And perhaps someone has been carrying that secret for 7 years. My thoughts on the case. From an investigative standpoint, there are several things about the murder of Elizabeth Barraza that stand out. First, this appears highly targeted. This wasn't someone driving around looking for a random person to rob. The killer's actions suggest that Liz herself was the objective. Second, the timing is extremely significant. The attack happens within minutes of Sergio leaving. That raises an obvious investigative question. Did the killer know Sergio's normal work schedule? Or was the killer physically watching the house and waiting for him to leave? Third, there's the garage sale. How many people knew Liz would be outside that morning? Was it advertised publicly? Were signs posted? Did Liz tell friends, co-workers, or people online? Or did the killer already know what she planned to do? Fourth, there is the disguise. If investigators are correct that the clothing was intended as a disguise, that tells us something about the offender. The killer may have been worried about being recognized. And that creates another question. Recognized by whom? Liz? Her neighbors? Surveillance cameras? Or all three? Finally, there's the return trip past the crime scene. If the same vehicle really did circle back shortly after the shooting, I find that particularly interesting. It suggests the killer wasn't simply panicking and escaping. There appears to be a level of control, and that may tell investigators something about the type of person they're looking for. But theories are not evidence, and until evidence points to a particular person, we should be extremely cautious about publicly accusing anyone. One reason I continue talking about cases like Elizabeth Barraza's is because unsolved does not necessarily mean unsolvable. That's also one of the themes of my book, Cold Cases, the most infamous unsolved murders and the science that could solve them today. In that book, I look not only at some of America's most fascinating unsolved murders, but at the modern investigative tools that can breathe new life into cases investigators once thought might never be solved. DNA, genetic genealogy, improved fingerprint technology, digital evidence, surveillance enhancement, database comparisons, and sometimes something much simpler: one person finally deciding to talk. Liz Barraza's case has surveillance footage. It has a suspected vehicle. Investigators say they still have physical evidence, and law enforcement believes the murder was planned. That means there are still avenues to pursue. In closing, someone walked up Elizabeth Barraza's driveway on the morning of January 25, 2019. Someone spoke to her. Someone pulled a gun. Someone fired 4 times. Someone got back into a Nissan Frontier and drove away. And unless that person acted entirely alone and never told another living soul, someone else may know the truth. There is currently a $50,000 Crime Stoppers reward for information leading to an arrest in the case. Anyone with information about the murder of Elizabeth Barraza can contact Crime Stoppers of Houston at 713-222-TIPS. That's 713-222-8477. Tips may be made anonymous. Take another look at the surveillance images. Think about where you were in January of 2019. Think about anyone you knew who drove a dark Nissan Frontier. Think about anything someone may have told you that didn't seem important at the time. Because after 7 years, the answer to this mystery may not be locked inside a police evidence room. It may be locked inside someone's memory. Elizabeth Barraza was 29 years old. She was a wife, a daughter, a friend, a volunteer, a Star Wars fan who used something she loved to bring happiness to other people. She deserves more than to be remembered as the woman murdered while setting up a garage sale. She deserves an answer. Her family deserves an answer. And whoever killed Liz needs to be held accountable. I'm Alan Key, and you've been listening to Cold Cases with Alan Key. If you enjoy examining unsolved cases and the investigative science that may someday solve them, you can also find my book, Cold Cases, the most infamous unsolved murders and the science that could solve them today, available on Amazon or Google Books. Please subscribe to the channel, share this episode, and join me next time as we examine another case where the answers may still be out there, waiting to be found. Until next time, remember, behind every cold case is a victim. Behind every unanswered question is a family still waiting for answers. And no matter how many years have passed, the truth still matters.